Well, it's Halloween, so let's talk about couldn't resist. A good jump scare not only spices up a horror movie, sometimes, as we'll see, it will be the most memorable part of that movie. An over-reliance on jump scares can become just as tedious as an over-reliance on anything else. Yes, I'm looking at you, Conjuring verse. But never mind that, let's talk about 5 really good ones. Oh, by the way, some very, very obvious spoilers coming up. When I mention the name of the movie, if you haven't seen it and you don't want it spoiled, maybe skip the next few minutes.
Number 5.
Cat People, the original, not the remake with Malcolm McDowell and Natasha Kinski. Popular wisdom kind of records this as being the original jump scare. Now, I don't know if it was the first ever jump scare in a horror movie or thriller. What I do know is it's the first one that made the kind of impact that people are still talking about it. Like, the scene is very simple. A woman is walking alone along a dark and deserted street. She hears rustling sounds and growls from behind her, which lead her to believe that she's being stalked by some kind of enormous beast, specifically a big black panther. And just as she's about to panic and break into a run, a bus pulls up and fills half the screen immediately. But the clever thing is, the sound of the hydraulics of the bus's brakes are mixed in such a way that they sound a bit like a panther roar. So this is indeed the first jump scare. It not only invents the jump scare, it invents the other convention, which is the fake-out jump scare. You know, when the imminent appearance of something horrible is being hyped up by the narrative, so you get so tense that when something perfectly harmless pops out instead, you freak out as much as you would if it had been the scary thing. Another example in Alien, when they're looking for the chest burster and they find the cat.
Number 4.
Exorcist 3 Legion. Putting this one in because many people regard this as the single greatest jump scare of all time, and also because it's kind of the only thing that anybody really remembers about this movie. Exorcist 3 is very good. The trouble is that Exorcist 2 The Heretic was so bad that Exorcist 3 tends to get tarnished by association. What makes this jump scare so effective is an incredibly long and agonizing build-up to it, which at the time doesn't really feel like it's building up to anything, so that when it actually happens, it completely blindsides you. By this point in the movie, one thing that we know is that someone or something is going around decapitating people, evidently with a big set of autopsy shears. Now, this scene starts off with about 5 minutes of complete silence. No music, no dialogue. We are in a hospital corridor. A night duty nurse is walking in and out of various rooms in this corridor as we looked along the length of it. And just as she turns around and locks the last door and turns to go, that door bursts open again and something dressed in what looks like splash-proof sheeting and wielding an enormous pair of shears just comes striding out after her. Now, we don't see what this figure then does to this nurse, but the fact that there is then a smash cut to a statue with its head smashed off very much hints at it. Again, this is all about the execution. You have the 5 minutes of silence beforehand. You have the fact that the thing that startled us bursts out of a room that the nurse has just checked. So evidently this thing was in there and she missed it. And also the execution of the scare itself is great. You have a smash zoom into whatever this mysterious figure is. There's this screaming noise on the soundtrack, and then you have the smash cut to the headless statue, implying all the horrors that we didn't get to see, and which are all the more gruesome for us not getting to see them. Number 3, Insidious, He's Behind You. Now, I'm putting this in because it's kind of the last truly memorable jump scare that I'm aware of. And also, it's another one of those jump scares which comes to define the whole movie. It's the only bit anybody really knows about the movie. In fact, I've seen the still of this jump scare, I think, being used as the thumbnail for this movie on Netflix, which seems a bit self-defeating. Insidious, as you may well know, is about a young family with a young, chronically ill son who begin to believe that their house is haunted, and then they begin to believe that it's not really the house that's haunted, it's specifically their son is being haunted, that some hideous entity has in some way latched itself onto their son. And again, there's a nice build-up. The family have brought in this spiritualist, or rather, Mum has. Dad doesn't believe a word of it. Dad, incidentally, is played by the extraordinary actor Patrick Wilson, who manages to not be famous despite being in everything. And the spiritualist is telling them the story about a horrible dream she had about the house in which she sees this entity, and this entity, this entity was only being glimpsed at this point. All we know is that it's sort of tall and skinny with long spindly Nosferatu fingers. And as the spiritualist is telling the story to Dad, she suddenly reacts, and we cut to Dad, and this thing is looking out from behind Dad. It's kind of a bit of a Darth Maul knockoff. It's all dark red and black stripes. The angle of Patrick Wilson stays exactly the same. There's just a shot of him listening, and then it cuts back, and it's exactly the same shot of him listening, but Thingy is over here looking over his shoulder. It actually takes you a second to figure out what you're looking at. And the Thingy goes... genuinely quite effective, but again, it's the only thing that anybody really remembers about this movie. And number 2, maybe a surprise to some of you, is the hand from Carrie. Now, I had to put this one in because this is possibly the most memorable jump scare of all time. Most people would put this in at number 1. I have a personal favourite I'm putting in at number 1. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But this, while not being the only thing that anybody remembers from Carrie, there are all kinds of moments that people remember from Carrie. And by the way, I'm talking about the original 1976 Brian De Palma one. I know there was a fairly redundant remake with Chloe Moretz about 10 years ago. Soon recall there's also a TV version from the 90s which actually has Carrie survive because it was meant to be a pilot for a TV show. But if you've seen Carrie, and the fact that you haven't clicked off suggests to me that you have seen Carrie, you know the bit I'm talking about. It's right at the end. After it's all kicked off, Carrie has been humiliated at the prom. Carrie has exacted her vengeance upon the whole town. Carrie has been stabbed by her mum. Carrie has psychically crucified her mum with cutlery. And Carrie and her mum have basically met their end as Carrie collapses the house in upon them using her psychic powers. We have Amy Irving as Sue, the only one of the mean girls who ever tried to be nice to Carrie, and as such the only survivor of the prom massacre, is in bed being tended to by her mom. And Sue has this dream, which starts off quite idyllic, of her walking with a bunch of flowers to the bit of ground where the house isn't anymore. There is a for sale sign stuffed into the ground on which somebody has rather cruelly daubed Carrie Wright burns in hell with an arrow pointing downwards. And as she goes to put the flowers at the base of the sign, this bloodstained hand bursts up through the ground and grabs her wrist, and she starts screaming the walls down, and it cuts quite nicely into cuts between the dream and reality of her screaming being held by this bloodstained hand, and actually of her back in bed with her arm being held by her mum, shrieking and shrieking and shrieking and shrieking until the movie fades to black. The idea being, of course, that no good will ever come of this. This is an entirely negative outcome, and that even the people who live through it are going to be barking mad for the rest of their lives. So in that respect, yes, it's a magnificently bleak ending achieved through a jump scare. So it's not just a jump scare for the sake of it. It's actually underlining the absolute hopelessness of the situation. But again, it's all about the execution. The timing of this is really rather nice. If you remember in my movie about the all-time great movie twist, what's particularly good about the twist at the end of The Sixth Sense, which in retrospect is glaringly obvious, is not the fact that it is suddenly bang revealed to you. It's that it is slowly revealed to you so that you actually figure it out about 20 seconds before the movie owns up to what the twist is. And that gives you an incredibly satisfying feeling. And that's why I think that twist is possibly has become the most beloved movie twist of all time. One of the reasons this is perhaps the best remembered jump scare of all time is, again, the execution. People tend to think that the incidental music clang coincides with the hand coming up. It doesn't. If you watch, the hand comes up and the clang doesn't start until the hand grabs Amy Irving's wrist. So you see it for about a second before the movie actually points it out. So rather than the movie going, look at the thing, you go, you spot it before the movie shows it to you. So rather than it just going boom and hitting you straight in the chest, you get that kind of, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, kind of feeling. And that's why this is possibly the best remembered jump scare of all time. The execution of it is immaculate. But I've got one I like even better, just because it's the one that messed me up the most. And it's one that I've mentioned before, and it's one which is strangely topical because the film, or rather the TV miniseries in question, has just been remade again. I refer, of course, to Salem's Lot. I have not seen the new version of Salem's Lot, nor indeed have I seen the one that everybody has now forgotten about that was made 20 years ago, starring Rob Lowe. As I mentioned the last time we spoke about this when I was doing my list of genuinely good vampire movies, The central vampire character in Salem's Lot in the book is a character called Mr. Barlow. And in the book, he's basically Dracula. He is urbane and sophisticated and kind of aristocratic in a European kind of way. And in that middle version, he was played by Rutger Hauer, and while I haven't seen it, that is apparently the way they went with that character. In the original Toby Hooper directed TV miniseries, they go a completely different way with Mr. Barlow and basically make him Nosferatu turned up to 12. So the look, he's played by an actor called Reggie Nalder. The look is kind of based on Max Schreck in Nosferatu, but even worse. As I believe I said before, this particular vision of Mr. Barlow is like vampirism with the human element completely removed. You don't get the impression that Mr. Barlow has ever been human. I've seen the redesign of Mr. Barlow for the new one, and they've kind of gone for a bit of a halfway house in as much as he looks a bit like Reggie Nalder from the TV show, but not as scary. Oh, and he talks. Whereas the whole point of Mr. Barlow in the TV miniseries is he is the reverse of compromise. He is pure vampirism. And the first time you get a good look at him, there is a scene in a jail cell. One of the town good old boys has beaten up the central character played in the original version incredibly well, incidentally, by a really sweaty and panicky looking David Soul. He has beaten him up for moving in on the girl he fancied. And he is now lying in a jail cell. There is a faint rustling noise. We see a sort of skeletal hand waft across the lock of the jail cell, which then pops up. And as the guy sits up in bed to see what's happening, Mr. Barlow just pops up in the frame, and I will let you get a look at him this time. And given that by then you've spent a whole episode and a half wondering what this thing is that's slowly turning the town into vampires, and you suddenly get this crash-cut look at him, it really didn't disappoint. And I saw this when I was about 12, and I leapt halfway out of my skin. And even now, when I watch that scene, I am so on edge waiting for that reveal. So, yeah, maybe not the best executed, maybe not the best remembered, but it's the one that gave me the most nightmares. So that's my favourite jump scare. All right, I'm sure you've got some favourite jump scares that I've forgotten to mention. In the comments they go, and happy Halloween.
Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please hit like and share. If you'd like to see more, please hit subscribe. And if you'd like to help me make more, please visit patreon.com/MitchBen.